Greetings all, BW here. This is the third video in our deep dive on the Marvel character Marrow, and we are just going to get right into it. There's going to be some high highs and some low lows, and there's a lot of the lows, I think. It's a bit of a slog sometimes, but the high points are really great. So let's just jump right into it. So the first issue we're going to start with is Uncanny X-Men number 350. Now this is Siegel, who is a writer that we're going to see a lot of in this video, in particular in this stretch. It's a rather dramatic issue where Gambit is on trial for his role in recruiting the Marauders for Sinister, who then who assigned him to lead that team. So it's in the flashback. He had them assemble them, and then he says he wants him. Maybe I should be specific with my pronouns here. Sinister wants Gambit to now lead the Marauders into the alley, to like infiltrate the alley where the Morlocks are, which leads to the Mutant Massacre, right? He says, we read that Sinister, quote, deemed their existence scientifically useless, right? So we've got some connections there. It's revealed that Gambit saved young Marrow as he fled the carnage. So there's some big revelation there. Marrow says, I can't do the accent, but it's written this way, right? Couldn't have stopped the ones I'd gathered, so I helped whoever I could to get out. Managed to snatch one little girl out of harm's way. Don't know who she was. Bones sticking every which way out of her face. Marrow herself is not present when he's saying this, so I don't think she knows this. In fact, in all of the reading, and I'm just going to set this up now, it's never clear that Gambit explains his role in the Mutant Massacre to Marrow. And there's a lot of stuff going on in the X titles, and there's just character bloat. And so it's not always clear who knows what, when. Maybe she just learns and it isn't a big deal. It feels like it would be a really big deal, but whatever. So in summary, the author here is Siegel, who's actually responsible for the script back on X-Men number 68, where Lobdell was on the plot. So this writer does have some experience with Marrow, and I feel like the inconsistency of describing Marrow as having bones sticking out of her face that doesn't really match with her first appearance that we've seen is forgivable. And it does seem to kind of set the standard moving forward. This entire issue is framed like a trial for Gambit because of his crime for helping Sinister in the Mutant Massacre. And I did say that was going to be a big thing. The Mutant Massacre was going to affect the X-Men for a long time, and we're still seeing echoes of it, a decade or more later. The whole thing is super dramatic, and there are other plots going on. And I actually wrote in my notes, I don't care enough to track them down. I genuinely don't. A lot of these comics were just uninteresting reads. Presumably, though, this is why Bobby Drake formed his own impromptu team during the Zero Tolerance, because many of the X-Men are off doing these other things. In this case, a lot of them are a captive audience for this sort of mock trial that's going on. It's worth noting that while there had previously been time gaps between the published issues for Marrow, so sometimes we were jumping several months or even almost a year between appearances, because there are now two titles, X-Men and Uncanny X-Men, that feature Marrow to varying degrees, we've suddenly jumped to potentially sometimes 2 stories a month. And then again, reading directly from my notes here, what even is continuity? Okay, next issue, X-Men 70, and this is Joe Kelly writing. Bobby is ice-sliding Cecilia and Marrow back to the mansion. So this is post-Zero Tolerance. They're picking up pretty much right after that. They're headed back to the mansion. Marrow is clearly enjoying the experience, probably because Reyes isn't, but kind of postures as unimpressed when it all ends. They arrive at the mansion, and Marrow comments, quote, "So this is it? Xavier's big old mutant playground, the promised land, the palace of light. The Morlock elders constantly flooded our dream time with tales of the mutant haven at the end of eternity's gutter. A place where we could live in the open, free. Even the ugly ones could feel the sun. Now that I'm finally here, I see it's just another upworlder eyesore." And then after hearing about all the amenities and things that Bobby's explaining about the mansion, she says, "I don't eat anything I don't kill. Can't trust it." I just love that as a setup. But we discover that the mansion is empty. And the text reads, quote, "Marrow represses an uneasy snicker as the austerity of the empty building reminds her of a church, one where prayers come to die." Some other X-Men show up. Scott is in critical condition, and Marrow postures briefly with Storm. Wolverine asks about the Bone Chick, but he theoretically already knows who Marrow is. The situation is explained. So Bastion, back in Zero Tolerance, put a nanobomb into Scott Summers' torso. Reyes hands out... I'm sorry. I love the 90s, man. So Reyes hands out assignments. Like, she's a doctor, so she starts giving assignments for supplies. Storm is out getting water when Marrow confronts her, and Marrow actually says to her, quote, "Down a heart, but you don't hear me complaining." And she says Bobby invited her to the mansion. She admits that it's beautiful. She says, quote, "Never thought the place would be this beautiful. We heard stories, but who knew? Trees, fresh air, nice weather, safe." Which is interesting to contrast even just to what she was saying earlier. They posture again, but there are more pressing matters. And so later during surgery, she flirts with Cannonball, Sam Guthrie, offering him a pestle. He's grinding up some supplies for Reyes. She says, quote, "Looks like you need a bigger pestle, boy. A pestle for that mortar. You do know how to grind, don't you?" And I would reiterate that I love the 90s. Juggernaut shows up to claim his half of a fortune due to Charles's incapacitation. He's kind of not with the team for a while. And so he's looking for his inheritance. And it's really kind of an interesting interaction, because in the end, he leaves out of pity when the rest of the X-Men from the trial all arrive. Gambit and Bishop are there, and Juggernaut notes that, but everybody else is. So there's just loads of people there. And then it kind of ends with Juggernaut like, there's no way, how low you have fallen, right? So Cecilia needs tools to operate on Scott, and Marrow ends up donating some of her own bones to the cause. They aren't quite ready to pop, she says, so she has to pull them from her forearm with some considerable pain. But the text, even though it's like in that dramatic, like it's being shouted, is, "Oh yeah," like a Slim Jim commercial. So I don't know. I like I said, this is one of the highs for me. There's going to be some lows later on. This whole issue concludes, of course, with Scott safe, and he says, quote, "Things are going to start looking up for the X-Men. I can feel it in my bones." Oh, and as we're reading that, Marrow is blowing a kiss to Cannonball, and she carves out "This way to a dark ride" on the door, which is to her room. So we started. Remember the evil terrorist, Marrow? Okay, now she's just a rude punk jerk. But at least she's more easy on the eyes, maybe, I guess, like all good heroes are or something. They do a lot of visual rebooting, revamping, and inconsistency. So this is Joe Kelly, and he'll be at the job for a while. Apparently, the Morlocks had told stories of the X-Mansion, and Marrow's reaction to it is typical for her: feigned disinterest, disappointment, and disgust, while hinting at maybe actually feeling something else. And I have it written, "Honestly, we're about to head into my least favorite stretch of stories here. Joe Kelly and some gems notwithstanding, but I did like Juggernaut just up and leaving the bloated team of X-Men to wallow in their own misery. Interesting that Marrow doesn't yet have enough control to grow bones on demand and has to instead yank them loose," which again is just part of the evolution of the character. Eventually that sort of thing is ignored. But I like to think that there's some degree of growth in terms of how she is able to control her bones, because there's a lot of training sequences in the Danger Room moving forward, and that may just be something that she learns. All right, next issue is just kind of a quick one-shot. It's called Thrall. It's by a writer that we haven't seen much of, Dezago. It's a fantasy-themed issue. Marrow is a thief, and it turns out that Mesmero has been altering everyone's perceptions in a subway, so they're all thinking it's like a fantasy world, and then they break the spell, so to speak, and that's it. It's not really anything of super interest. The last time we did see Dezago was during the Lila Cheney concert. That issue was Dezago writing as well. So, okay, next issue. So this is X-Men number 71, and Marrow is eating breakfast in the mansion's kitchen while the others gawk. Reyes asks if the bone growth on her face hurt, as it must have come in overnight. She has this big, on the left side of her face, this big grown bone. But Marrow just snaps it off. and offers to stab it through Reyes's face in answer to her question. She's rude and leaves a mess, though Beast and Reyes take that sample that she broke off to study later. Sam is bringing Cecilia and Maggot into town, and Marrow remarks that she's hurt being left behind, to which Storm says that she must earn that privilege. And then the whole issue ends with Scott and Jean leaving, but Wolverine isn't there to wish them well because he is in the basement where Marrow is carving "Beware the Bones" on the wall and just generally brooding. So this is Joe Kelly. Other than learning a little bit about Marrow's bone growth, which actually it's more acknowledged, we don't really learn anything so much about it. It's quite rapid in addition to what we already know about it being constant and painful. Like that grew overnight. It was a big chunk of bone that had grown overnight. But she's just a punk. Nothing super amazing there. Next issue. So this is 352, Uncanny X-Men 352. Angel visits the mansion. While Logan, Beast, Joseph, and Maggot are cleaning up and fixing the place, it's a wreck because I guess Bastion took all of their supplies during Zero Tolerance in issues that we didn't cover. So the mansion was empty. And then when Juggernaut showed up, he kind of wrecked the place. So these guys are kind of fixing things up. And there's some drama because he wasn't helping earlier, because Angel wasn't helping earlier, and he leaves, but not before Marrow spots him and says, quote, "Nice to see you don't just pick on the new kids, Claw," because Wolverine is like giving Angel a hard time, right? So she says sort of out loud, "Nice to see you don't just pick on the new kids, Claw. I'm sure it's a sign of affection." But then kind of like in a transparent text, like a more of a whisper, "You'll always be an angel to me, Warren, even if everyone else doesn't appreciate you." And it's unclear how many people would have heard that. And she kind of like blows him a kiss. This is Siegel writing again. The art changes here, even mid-issue. And you can see on the cover there on your screen, they're boasting about having lots of artists involved. Yeah, that's just par for the course now. We get Marrow with brown hair and light brown skin tones, and that is kind of her look. So I think there's a lot of communication going back and forth about a lot of different characters and a lot of different stories. And I think Marrow was probably at the bottom of most people's lists. And so it is what it is. Scott and Jean almost crash a plane while everyone else that isn't Marrow is helping to clean up the mansion, and that's pretty much it. So this next issue that we're going to talk about is called Life Lessons, X-Men number 72, and it opens, and this is a good one, opens with Marrow talking to Wolverine in what I presume is the empty danger room. It's kind of dark. And she's hovering, she's crouched over a mushroom or a mold that's growing up out of the floor. And she is talking to him, saying how he's necessary in order for Storm to keep her hands clean. She says, quote, "You like the dark, don't you? Of all the sheep hopping around Xavier's school, you're the one who thrives in cramped, nasty spaces with damp and dead cold. I can tell you, I can smell. You relish this sort of thing. You know how to have fun. Not like her. Storm would rather be playing with her flowers. She thinks she understands them. Thinks she has the formula to control them. Clip the parts that don't grow right, don't grow pretty, and they go away forever. But the Wind Rider is wrong. She's wrong and she knows it. Sun, water, light, love, love. That's what she wants to believe makes things grow proper. But she turns her pretty eyes away from the truth. Things grow in the dark. Hate is more powerful than the sun. Sewage replaces water, weeds strangle flowers, and no matter how many times she cuts back the wild vine, it always grows back. That's why you're here. So she doesn't have to get the grime under her nails, trying in vain to clip. So she doesn't have to get dirty again. So she can stay the goddess of gardening in her empty greenhouse. Besides, according to the whispers I've heard, when you cut something, it stays cut. Isn't that right, Master Wolverine, sir?" And the lights come on as she says that last part. Wolverine tries to talk some sense, but she knows better, and they end up dueling, which she says is the real reason that he's down there anyway. And I'll just interject to say that this is referenced in a later issue, and it's kind of ambiguous. I think Marrow has taken Wolverine's presence to mean that Wolverine was sent to get rid of her, which is not exactly how the X-Men work, but it's understandable like that she would expect that. Later on, Sam stares at the basement door to Marrow's room, the carving, but Storm tells him to leave her alone, and he says that she's just a kid. Marrow and Wolverine are fighting, and she says it's her birthright to claim tomorrow, but he mocks her, saying that the Morlocks he knew weren't denied dignity, but in fact had plenty. He calls her a disgrace to her people. The fight continues with Marrow saying, quote, "This was between me and the Wind Rider, old one. All I wanted was to repay her for breaking my heart, but no one dares challenge my birthright. I am Morlock. I am the ugly face of rage all mutants feel for humanity, and while hot blood feeds my heart, I will fight and claw and scrape and bite until you learn what that means." And then elongates her fingers out into claws. She sometimes looks like Lady Deathstrike. It reminds me of Lady Deathstrike, at least in the cartoon. She kind of like stretches out her anatomy a little bit in her forearms, which causes Logan to actually observe that she can, quote, can control her bones when she's ticked off enough. But she says, "I want respect, and there can be no respect until debts are settled. A dead human for each dead mutant, a heart for a heart, blood for blood." And Marrow seems to be in something of a berserker state as she slaps Wolverine, saying, "Tag, Harry, Harry. See, hate works. Hate burns hotter than your pretty words and sleepy time dreams, and tastes better too." She drew blood. She's like licking on her talons. "Hate is the engine. I am the machine, and I will never, ever stop unless you extinguish my fire for good." He offers her a place, not as a kid, but as a soldier under his tutelage, seeing a little bit of himself in her, which we understand that's definitely something that they've made the connection for, right? But she actually tricks him, and she reaches up to take his hand, but ends up stabbing him in the neck. And this kind of activates his berserker rage. So as he gasps for breath with a bone knife through his windpipe, Marrow says, quote, "You were right about me, old man. I did come here to learn, but all I've picked up so far from your brood is how to be weak. Storm is too guilty to deal with the problem she created. Come back to haunt her. And you were so busy trying to save me, you lost the edge that made you a legend in the tunnels. Weak people get hurt. I've already learned that lesson. Show me something I don't know." But then the berserked Wolverine goes in for the kill, and everyone in the mansion kind of hears his howl. And Sam is the first one to respond. He comes crashing through and like pulls Logan away, smashing him into a wall. The others also arrive, and he remarks that Wolverine would be dead. Sam, I think, is the one that remarks on it. But in other words, he didn't kill Wolverine, but obviously if you get hit by cannonball, it's a big deal. He'd be dead if not for his healing factor. Storm is losing control of her team, and she steps on the mushroom, the fungus that Marrow was crouched over from earlier. Marrow, while all this is happening, has fled back to the tunnels, which a text box informs us is actually called Eternity's Gutter, stretching from the mansion all the way to the Morlock tunnels. And she talks as she runs. She says, quote, "Stay, learn, grow, lies. Lies, and I shoved them right back down his throat. Lies, had to be. I'm not a part of that world. It could never want me. Too mean, too ugly. No room for me in that pretty dream. Who would want me? No one back there, only here." She returns to Callisto, and she says, "Here's where I belong, and what I deserve." Callisto is still recovering, but she lies, and she says she had a good day, and that she was making friends. Because Callisto sent her, and so she's kind of like, bluffing. This is a Joe Kelly issue, and I'll mention the ending first. I've already said that I like tight writing, and you see it here at the end. Marrow, who is raging about lies, right? She's running along and talking about the lies. She then actually lies to Callisto. Fans will notice that Marrow's skin tones and hair color are changing still, toning down and becoming less obvious, while the bones in her face are becoming more prominent. Lots of people in this issue refer to her as a kid, even though we know that she would be in her mid-20s. But we're going to chalk that up to new writers and the kind of reboot that we're seeing, and this is moving forward, lots of people are going to call her a kid. Sam is built as kind of a possible love interest, and it feels like Marrow wants to be pretty and accepted, but is pushing it all away out of self-loathing. It is what it is. I'm not sure I totally agree with that, but that's kind of how it's being framed. Notably, nobody chases her into the tunnels. Theoretically, they're all in the same spot, and nobody went after her. They want Wolverine light with the character, and that's kind of what we're seeing. There would be some divergence, and she'll come into her own, but really it's kind of starting in this issue that they are making her up to be like a Wolverine part 2. Overall, still a very Marrow-centric issue. My goodness, words. Overall, still a very Marrow-centric issue. And I think it's a good glimpse into at least this early incarnation of the character and what they had planned and stuff. All right, next issue. X-Men, Uncanny X-Men 353. The team is going to the pond in winter, but Marrow sends a message through Maggot, who is one of the other new characters, and she just says, "I'm staying in the basement, and you can tell Wolverine that I'll come up when hell freezes over." She does show up eventually, though, in a tree, and she's sort of taunting Wolverine. He leaves the others for solitude, gets attacked by Sauron, who is seen by the others and whom he attacks. Again, not much to see here. There's lots of things going on, but nothing really much for Marrow. This is Siegel and Bachalo, Bachalo. Some names that we'll see, Bachalo especially, we will see occasionally. Siegel seems to be kind of trading with Kelly on the two titles, back and forth. But not a huge Marrow issue. Oops, bumped my microphone there. Sorry about that. X-Men 73, it's December 31st, and Marrow bursts out of Cecilia's room, nearly knocking her over, carrying her medical bag and some books. That's all we see of Marrow in this issue. She's basically stealing Reyes's medical stuff. So Wolverine does a bit of explaining to Storm, in which Marrow's victory over him may have been all according to plan. But other than just that fleeting glimpse of Marrow, she's not in this one. And this is a Kelly and Casey co-writing this issue. Next one, 354, Uncanny X-Men 354. Marrow walks in on Rogue, who is at the house trying to resuscitate Joseph, who is like this Magneto clone ? And while the other ones are fighting Sauron, she walks in on Rogue and Joseph, and she's like giving a mouth to mouth. And she says of herself that she's just taking care of some, quote, private business, which we would presume is Callisto and the medical supplies and stuff. So it's Siegel and Bachalo co-writing. My notes just say it's a nothing burger, but we just get it confirmed that Marrow is up to something, which we kind of already know. X-Men Unlimited. So this has a couple different short stories in it, and one of them is exclusively Marrow. It's called Guiding Light. It's by Roseman writing. And in the opening cover, in the opening cover of the story, we read, "Little is known of the young girl." In the opening cover, right. They give little text boxes of the characters that are going to be featured. And so like this is the one for Marrow. It says, "Little is known of the young girl, also known as Sarah, other than that she is among the second generation of Morlocks, a group of disenfranchised mutants who have sought sanctuary in tunnels far beneath the streets of Manhattan. Unlike her predecessors, however, Marrow refuses to hide from an uncaring humanity and has often used her detachable bones as deadly weapons in a one-woman war on humankind." So that's kind of like up in the cover, on the inside cover of the issue. But then for her story, we see a long line of lit candles that go down a sewer tunnel where Marrow is taking care of Callisto by candlelight. And Cal is still healing from her injuries when a construction crew is working in the tunnels. They can hear a construction crew working down there. So Marrow grabs the foreman and reminds him, sort of privately, and reminds him of the Mutant Massacre in the headlines, like in the newspaper headlines that he would have seen. And she just kind of says, quote, "We didn't all die." She points to a red, so it's kind of ambiguous the way it's drawn and colored. It's a red, maybe blood stain or mural. I think it's probably supposed to be the actual spot, but it could, in theory, just be like an homage. But it's the outline of Angel being pinned on the wall, which happened during the Mutant Massacre. She describes this spot to the foreman as holy ground, and she threatens the worker, whose name is Jim Pillman. She swipes his name tag so that she knows who he is, so if she has to do a follow-up, she can find him and his family. Which works. This all works as a sort of threat. So the crew leave, and Marrow returns to Cal, and they joke about how she was able to get them away. Cal says she thinks Marrow is still a scared little girl, to which Marrow replies, quote, "Whatever gets you through the night." The final panel of this story is the silhouette again, but with a candle in the foreground. And what's interesting is we had just seen it, and there were no candles. So maybe Marrow just lit it, since it wasn't in the earlier shot. I don't know. Again, could be intentional, but it's certainly, through the visual storytelling, kind of a nice moment. So this is a new writer. It's because it's kind of a one-shotty sort of situation. X-Men Unlimited is interesting, and Marrow does feature in a number of them, but it's I think what it is like one-offs, but more like opportunities to do the stories that don't fit into the main titles. This is why they're oftentimes collections or short stories. And this is just one of them. So even though this was published, it explicitly says that it takes place before X-Men 72, which is the one where Wolverine and Marrow were fighting in the Danger Room. So even though it's published a little bit later, we're covering it a little bit later, it was actually supposed to take place continuity-wise a little bit earlier. And this may explain why Marrow's brief flashback doesn't contain Gambit, because she doesn't know that yet. Marrow's skin and her hair. Oh, so there was a, yeah, we'll cover it later. Marrow's skin and hair tones are brown again, but again, you know, we can understand that. But the candle imagery and the artwork in general is just really nice. I didn't care for some of the artwork in some of these stretches. It was a little bit over, it was almost hyperbolic. It was just a little over exaggerated for me, but I liked this issue for the most part. Her reverence for Angel is actually a really nice foreshadowing for this next issue that we're going to cover. But it's itself not a super in-depth portrayal of the character, or you know, we don't learn anything super deep. It's just a neat story. It's a nice little story. I think one of the neat tensions that you'll see moving forward is that Marrow definitely talks a big talk, and yet she doesn't typically end up killing anybody, which is sometimes all that you could probably ask of her. So it's nice. She threatened the form. She's learning to use her words, which is nice. Okay. So great issue right here. X-Men 74. This is Joe Kelly writing. We open with Marrow lighting some candles around the injured Callisto. And she says, quote, "With light that was denied us, I heal you. By the stone heart of earth, to he who was crucified and reborn." And she gives Callisto a small doll of Angel, like a rag doll that she's kind of made up to hold, and tells Callisto to lie back, let the magic happen. Callisto is coughing and trying to get Marrow to return to the X-Men, but it's not working. "To him who was reborn, I beg for your life." So it's not just that one place being holy ground. She's treating Angel with this sort of sympathetic magic, this holy reverence, which is just really cool to see when she's not stabbing people, that she's doing other things. So our view, the story switches to Angel, who is enjoying flying with his real wings on a snowy day. This is part of his story, which we're not covering, but he had biomechanical wings for a while, and apparently his real wings pushed him out or something like that. So he says, quote, "I graze the dawn alone with eyes shut, and like magic, I am no longer Warren Worthington III." Enjoying his wings, he decides to enter the Morlock tunnels, where they were first taken from him. And I have a side note here, and we'll talk about it in a second, but he can see, there's a mention of how he can see in the dark. Marrow was lighting candles, but I sometimes wonder if she also doesn't have better vision. Kind of one of those ambiguous things about her senses. But we switch back to Marrow, who's helping Cal and just wants to make sure that she's taken care of. Let me say that again. Marrow is helping Cal, and Callisto, wants to make sure that Marrow, is taken care of when Callisto, dies, or if she dies. And Marrow responds, quote, "They offer nothing, Callisto. You think that it's a school for mutants, but they only want to teach the pretty ones, the ones they can control. And I taught them. No one controls Marrow." She leaves, and she ponders that she'd prefer to stay in the tunnels rather than go back to the mansion. She says, quote, "Even if I did want to go back, which I don't, they would never have me, especially not the pretty Wind Rider. I'll stay here until it's time for my ascension to the Upworld, when I show them all what ugliness is." But she's kind of interrupted in her thoughts as Angel is attacked by Abomination, who is down in the tunnels. And she watches, sort of unseen, and she remarks, it's him, here, he's perfect, my Angel." While Abomination says Angel's presence actually defiles the sewers, Marrow observes, "He's so beautiful, he can't get hurt. Run left is the way out, please. No, that's the wrong. He smells so good, like the sun, breath in the moonlight, perfect. He's too good to be down here, not like us, not like the monsters." So she's kind of like trailing this whole scene, and remarking. She's trying not to be seen by him while he's trying not to be seen by Abomination, which is kind of cool. And then I have in all capitals, Dark Beast visits delirious Cal and injects her with something. And he actually appears as Colossus to her. Like, she thinks it's Colossus. But he says, just as long as you don't die, at least not until it's convenient for all interested parties, namely me. So Marrow wonders if Angel answered her prayers, if he came to take Cal away. And she confronts Abomination, and while he says that her voice is old, like the tunnels, Angel says she sounds like a child. She leads Abomination away from Angel, but she gets caught, and Angel reappears to help. Marrow asks why he didn't escape, and begs Angel not to look at her, and to just leave. Angel says she's not ugly, as Abomination is arguing, but she's beautiful, because she saved his life. Quote, to me, she's the most beautiful person in the world. So it's a pivotal moment for Marrow, as the battle is kind of a depiction of her own inner struggle about where she belongs, and the lie about strength coming from the darkness. And Abomination is really, they're really kind of doing a push and pull with Abomination and Angel. And Abomination really is laying it on thick. He grasps Angel's head, ready to end him, as Angel tells her to run. To, quote, get out of these tunnels and don't look back. And she considers for a moment, but realizes he called her beautiful. Quote, just like him. I can be just like... He said I was beautiful. Marrow throws 2 daggers into Abomination's eyes, temporarily freeing Angel. The 2 then essentially let Marrow choose her side, the light or the dark. But Abomination says that the hesitation is the answer, and he leaves. Kind of like Juggernaut in the other issue. He just leaves, telling Marrow she'll maybe have a place at his side when she returns. Angel asks Marrow why she didn't just run, and she responds, quote, I don't know. Not the sort of thing I usually do. He says she'll get used to it, and introduces himself as Warren. She shares her name, Sarah, and he offers to put in a good word with the X-Men, despite her battle with Wolverine. He's kind of heard about this, and but she leaves. And he tries to return her daggers, but they're actually some of his biomechanical pinions from when he had the techno-organic wings. And inscribed on the wall, she has written, light never dies, even in monsters. He thanks her quietly, even though she's already gone. And it's kind of, again, it's kind of that bookend to, we started with reverence, we're ending with reverence, but it's a different kind of reverence, right? But the actual issue itself, because there's another story going on with Wolverine and Maggot and everybody else, the actual final panel of the issue ends with Wolverine shouting in big letters, holy good God. And I think it's intentional. I'm sure it's intentional, because it fits that reverence theme, right? So it's a Joe Kelly issue, definitely one of my favorites of the whole stretch. There's other stuff happening, but the story is dripping with symbolism, and it's all framed as a battle over Marrow's soul. We see that she's not only a rude punk girl who stabs things, which she definitely is, but she also has this awe and reverence and a sort of mystical side about her as well. We see that Dark Beast is helping to keep Callisto alive, which would be confusing if you didn't understand more about what's going on with this plot thread, because he appears as Colossus. I will share with you on a rabbit trail here for a second that this was probably one of the most difficult pieces of researching Marrow that I had to uncover. Because there are a number of times where if you don't know that Dark Beast is working behind the shadows, then you have no idea who this character is. And he'll show up at least once more where I was absolutely floored. And then, you go looking online and people have their theories, but they're oftentimes, as I mentioned earlier, cut and pasted from other places that have their theories. And then you get to the end and it's like, oh, well, there's that one panel with the dubious writing, and I always just took it to mean such and such. And then everybody copies that without ever actually going and reading the comic itself. So the Dark Beast piece is there. I think they had a bigger plan for it, and it just never happened. Okay. Anyway, we learn a little bit more about her powers. Maybe she's got enhanced smell. Maybe she's got enhanced sight, and how she views beauty as not being from the sewers, which is contrasted with Abomination, who actually claims the territory as his. And we can begin to sort of make a chain from all of these links that we're picking up along the way. This version of Marrow has story tension that seems to center on her worthiness and her self-doubt. And so the better narratives are going to play with that. And it's why I say that that two hearts thing is much more powerful as a metaphor. Even if it's literal, it's a much better metaphor than just a literal characteristic. She is a child of two worlds, with two surrogate mothers riding the razor's edge, where one side is upworlder heroism that betrays her values, or at least that she sees as betraying her values, and the other is cutthroat villainy that has almost already killed her. And you could even say it did kill her, because it's obviously been a big deal in her life, and had she not had a second heart or regeneration or whatever, she would be dead. Okay, let's keep going here. The next one is X-Men 75 that we're going to talk about, and this one is called Anatomy of a Monster. Rogue notices the tension between Storm and Sam, which Storm explains is due to differences of opinion about Marrow being at the mansion. Quote, "He does not understand that we cannot abide reckless terrorists in our midst." Which goes to show you what Storm thinks of Marrow. But Rogue responds, "I don't know. I was pretty reckless when you took me in. Still am." And Storm says, "Perhaps, but you never took a life." And this is a really great line. Rogue flies off after concluding the whole argument with, "No, I just borrowed a few permanently. Trust me, Aurora, it's worse." Later, we see Wolverine, Beast, and Cecilia encounter the, and I have no idea how to pronounce this, Ingare, like some demon-looking things from another dimension, alien things. Cecilia flees and almost gets eaten by one of them, but Marrow kills the creature and saves her, sort of jumps out of a tree, ambush. Beast is wrestling with one nearby, and she easily and almost casually kills that one in one hit, which shocks Beast. But he puzzles at her return, to which she responds, "Say, join the club." And he's like, "Okay." So it's like, that's all it takes to come back. I guess when you save people's lives, that's a good in for the X-Men. But the three of them note that Wolverine has been captured, to which Reyes says, "But he's the toughest one." And Marrow responds, "Not anymore," which I feel is just kind of a little bit of a, not a foreshadowing so much, but like they're really obviously wanting Marrow to be a stand-in for Wolverine sometimes. But she's not. Later, they're also captured. Beast asks why Marrow is laughing. And she says two things, Furry. One, Morlocks are collectors of irony, and this situation is very ironic. I ran away from the mansion to avoid the wrath of the bad monster Wolverine. I finally returned to face the thing, only to be overcome by worse monsters, trapped with a beast. And down here, and the second reason is down here, the healer, talking about Reyes, they're trying to kill her. And her mutant power, Reyes' mutant power, is like a impenetrable force field. So they're trying to kill her, but it's not working. It's revealed, though, that it's not the Ingari, but Pilgrim, who is sort of the leader, is a Rute, who are slaves of the Ingari. We have seen the Ingari before. We had not seen the Rute before. And they were slaves and they rebelled. And so he's exploring Earth. Wolverine resembles / is their deity in some way, and so Pilgrim frees the others when he shows up, but then they battle as he loses faith at Wolverine's reluctance. It's kind of a whatever. Marrow has Maggot throw her at Pilgrim. Marrow has Maggot throw her at Pilgrim fastball special style, and it is the first smile that we've really seen on her. And I will tell you right now, it is the highlight of all of the Marrow research that I did, or all of the reading that I did. She's upside down, and it's just absolutely, she's just in her glory being thrown in fastball special style. But again, fastball special, that's a Wolverine thing, right? So she slices an amulet, which is the focus of Pilgrim's power. Sam catches her. She flirts with him. Beast asks Marrow how it feels to, quote, fight on the sides of the angels. And she responds, less bloody, more upworlders lived. All in all, not necessarily better. The dimension collapses. The team is deposited in Vegas. And there's a guard there. And he asks for ID. And Marrow answers, here's your ID, flat scan. We're the X-Men. We just saved your sad excuse for a world. You have a problem with this? And it's kind of like, there's an epilogue where Pilgrim has survived and he's going on. But like, that's kind of the end of the story. And I think it's great that the team lets Marrow say that we're the X-Men. Again, I think I've mentioned it before, but there are a lot of people who have been on the X-Men team in the sense of they've fought alongside them. But the roster of actual X-Men, people who were considered X-Men by the X-Men, is smaller. and Marrow is definitely on that list. She's absolutely an X-Man. Okay, so anyway, so this is a Joe Kelly issue. Marrow's appearance seems to be settling into more of a brown skin tone, more than pink, but don't worry, it doesn't say that way. She also has bone knee pads, which is a really cool feature. This is the first time that she's actually fought as part of the team properly. And I think it's nice that she gets the closing words of the issue. There are a lot of comics that feature Marrow, and we're going to cover all of them to some degree, but none, I love it. This is what I wrote, but none will ever stir my heart like the panel when she gets fastball specialed. Marrow is upside down, in flight, bone knife in mouth, with the widest grin that we'll ever see on her. She's a literal weapon in flight, and it's just great to see. I love that shot so much. Okay, so that was one of the highs, and now we're coming back down briefly. This is in an Excalibur issue. She makes an appearance because Nightcrawler calls the mansion during the events of X-Men number 75, and Marrow answers, and she is rude. She is colorful with her language choices. And when he asks for one of the real X-Men on the back of what we were just talking about, she cusses him out and puts her bone knife through the phone. So it's just like, somebody somewhere wanted to make sure that everybody understood Marrow is an X-Men. And it's, of course, it's an Excalibur issue, so this is not one of the writers that we've seen, Rob, R-A-A-B, Rab. But it's kind of like a nice little nod to like, yeah, hey, she counts. She's one of them. All right, next issue we're going to talk about is X-Men number 76. And Marrow is undergoing an examination in this from Cecilia Reyes after the battle. And Cecilia asks if the bone spikes hurt when they pop. To which Marrow answers, use your imagination. Cannonball enters the lab as Marrow, who is shirtless on the table. We don't ever see that. It's always from her back or partially covered or something. But from the other side, he would. And he's got his eyes closed. And she's kind of... So Marrow is at first sort of posturing and bickering with Reyes. And then she dares Sam to open his eyes, and see her topless. And Beast is there, like, kind of like overseeing the whole thing. And she's just being a punk. So this is Joe Kelly, nothing much more than a reminder that Marrow is a punk, and she flirts like one. She says that she has other things to do, and then kind of leaves, which is presumably Callisto related. I kind of just always assume, especially in these earlier issues, that anytime she's off screen, she's probably in the tunnels taking care of Cal, so it kind of fits. All right, X-Men 77. The team leaves for Africa via Psylocke's shadow portal. If it sounds like some of this is disjointed, please understand, A, it is, and B, I just didn't care enough about these other stories going on because there's so many of them. And especially when it comes to like the miniseries and the crossovers and stuff, I just don't care about Psylocke's shadow powers. This is not a deep dive on Psylocke. Someday we might do that. No, we won't. But that's not what I'm interested in here. So the team leaves for Africa through Psylocke's shadow portal, and they almost forget Marrow, who starts to talk about, she voices her ideas about redecorating Storm's room with everyone leaving, and then Wolverine's hand comes through the portal, reaches out, and then pulls her back in. So she ends up going along. When they're there in Africa, in this village, she notes that something's smell wrong, or she knows that things smell wrong, which is interesting considering what we've kind of started to establish about her other enhanced senses, maybe. Anansi, who's kind of the big bad, or at least ostensibly the big bad, teleports her away with some others, and Storm once again refers to her as a kid. She, Reyes, and Maggot are all together in a sort of no space, like a pocket dimension or whatever. Well, it's not, it's more mental, like telepathic. Their bodies are just collapsed in the real world. And Anansi says that he has given them the gift of truth. Marrow, for instance, doesn't have her pain and her bone protrusions. She says, quote, my bones, they're gone. It doesn't even hurt anymore. And Maggot actually made a comment, I forget exactly what it was, but he says something like, you're gorgeous. Wolverine seems to have been leashed and is bestial. And as further explanations are given, Anansi is allowing the newer folks a little bit of leeway, whereas the established X-Men, he's kind of like punishing. So Anansi says to Marrow, and this is the true you, Marrow, beautiful, pain-free, without the uncontrollable growth of bone. The gift of true sight, I give you your X-Men as they truly are, without their righteous lies and pretty costumes. I give you Xavier's dream, and show you it is a nightmare if you'll listen. And Marrow just simply responds, cool. But that's not happening on the physical, in the real world, and they're all laying still crumpled. And there's kind of this revelation that Anansi is actually the Shadow King, who is an X-Men bad guy that we've seen before, especially opposite Psylocke. This is Joe Kelly. Not a whole lot of Marrow going on, except that we get maybe that hint about her enhanced sense of smell, and that without her bone growths, she's beautiful and pain-free. And the letters at the back of the issue, the expression letters, are really hilarious because they're talking about the one with Angel and Abomination. They're talking about X-Men 74. And I'm not going to read them here, but it was just cute to read what fans were thinking and saying back then without having, like, we have, decades of comics after those letters were written, which provides context for stuff. But for them at that time in real time, their review of the character was interesting to read. Mostly positive. I think it was like 2 positives and a sort of negative about Marrow of the letters. So we move right ahead. We've got X-Men 78. And this is the next part. Shadow King returns Marrow's powers, which causes significant pain and lots of spiky overgrowth. And it kind of it comes back. I don't know if it's that she was surprised by it or what, but it comes back and all that pain sort of crashes in and all the bones growths kind of overgrow. So he's bartering with the trio of them. He tempts Marrow with the option to walk among the Upworlders, as is your birthright, but pretty, loved, touched, without pain, gazed at without pity or revulsion, as we see her depicted lying in the grass with presumably Sam Guthrie. Shadow King only asks for their allegiance to him. And then later on the astral plane, a young Storm is recalling things that she's done that deserve punishment, and ripping out Marrow's heart is one of them. Quote, "That's me. That's me when I did another bad thing, when I could not save a sick Morlock girl, so I pulled out her heart." Later, all Marrow and the others have to say is, "Hurt me, daddy," and Shadow King will make good on all of his promises. Storm stealthily frees them, though, and Marrow wants revenge. She finds herself transported to Sam's vision, and in Sam's vision that he's having, his father is beating him, and they're in a mine shaft, and she attacks immediately. And after Shadow King is defeated and they all wake up in the regular corporeal material plane, Sam thanks her, and she replies with typical typical biting words. She's rude to him, but she walks away with a grin, and she's thinking, smooth, nice, he's into me, yeah. So this is just the follow-up to the last issue. We're getting a glimpse into how Kelly is starting to flesh out Marrow. What would she be willing to do to be without pain? And yet the tension comes from the fact that it's her birthright, so the temptation certainly has teeth. For some reason, I'm reminded of a quote from the Count of Monte Cristo film, and Edmond Dantes, the main character, says, "If you ever loved me, don't rob me of my hate. It's all I have." And I feel like that is a crux for Marrow sometimes. It describes her. So what does Marrow really want, right? And what would she be willing to do to get it? So we can see the groundwork for those kinds of questions and their answers kind of being laid and teased out here. All right, next issue, number 79, X-Men number 79. Oh, we open with 2 officers on patrol. This is a good one. I liked this issue a lot too. So we open with 2 officers on patrol, the ones that Marrow knocked out in the basement of the police building during Zero Tolerance. So remember when she stabbed the fuse box and there were some officers down there and she knocked them out? All right, so it's the same 2. And the text reads, quote, "Lives steeped in chaos and mayhem need balance. Superstitions, rituals, and ceremony help impose order. Without them, the world gets in and brings with it monsters, ghouls, and worst of all, bad luck." We switch over to Marrow, who has just cut some hair off of a couple, off of the woman of a couple that were walking around, and they appear to have called her a name. I think it was Freak. It's sort of insinuated that they called her a freak, or at least the girl called her a freak. She leaves them alone, but she's out for blood. Quote, "The young girl Marrow has lived her life following a simple code. To survive in a broken world that hates and fears you, always give worse than you get. Tonight, Marrow got it pretty bad, so someone's going to pay. Anyone, until their misery outscreams her own." So Callisto, who is now apparently healed or mostly healed, She's fully dressed and she's working with Storm, and they're tracking Marrow. And Cal says, fact is, the surface world deserves anything Marrow throws their way. It was their scorn, their hatred of anything different that drove us Morlocks underground. But this isn't the way. It's not my plan for her, so we're going to make it right, especially since I'm the one she's angry at. And a flashback shows that Storm earlier did try to make peace with Marrow, but she was destroying her room in return until Cal showed up and scolded her for talking to her leader that way. So Marrow leaps into Cal's arms in the flashback and asks when they're leaving. But she mentions, she says, Callisto says, her talking about her safety, like she's safe here. And the insinuation seems to be that she wants Marrow to stay with the X-Men where she'll be safe. We do see Dark Beast going to give another, there's like an aside, we see Dark Beast going to give another injection to Cal and finding her gone, to which he remarks, quote, "It's too soon. If this precocious recovery has sullied my plans for your young charge, Marrow." And by the way, this and the previous time when he was Colossus and at the end of this issue, he's shown in shadow or like in part, which is what made it so difficult. It's not like, oh, that's obviously Dark Beast. It's kept kind of hush-hush. But he's obviously upset that Cal is gone. And so he's remarking about his plans for Marrow. Marrow is now sulking in Battery Park, thinking that Callisto is going to take her back once she was all healed up. Quote, "She leaves. Everybody leaves. Everyone is taken from me. No, not him. Not thinking about him." She spooks some pedestrians, catching the attention of Sam, and she thinks, by the first one, he came. Guthrie came for me. I have to say something. And then she says, "Come closer and I'll dance on your still beating heart and eat your spleen, Cannonball." She runs, taunting and angsty, and no one can stop me, especially not you, even if you try really hard. Back to the officers, the original officers that spotted the haircutted couple. Their description of who did this reminds them of Marrow, so they remember Marrow from before. And I don't think I put it in my notes, but they reveal later that night was very effective, or very they both ended up, one of them was, they weren't retired from the force, but it affected them in major ways. I think, did one of them, their family kind of fell apart, and the other one was kind of made a mockery or something. I don't remember the details, so don't quote me on that. But in other words, it was a very big moment in their life when they first met Marrow. So including them or re-including them in this issue is kind of a nice callback to that. And they recognize the description of Marrow. Cal and Storm are hunting the city, bickering, and Callisto says, "But when you get down to it, you X-Men always rescue the Kitty Prydes and the other pretty complacent mutants in lieu of someone like Sarah, who really needs saving." Sam is also hunting Marrow and recalls the letter from home that he got about having to go back. Marrow sees this, and if she can't have them, so he has kind of a flashback of where he got a letter calling him home, and Marrow was like on the staircase and saw that at the mansion. He doesn't know that. She sees this, and if she decides if she can't have him, excuse me, she attacks. She kind of like drops out of the tree. Present, like coming back to the moment, she drops out of the tree, but he blocks easily. And Marrow says, "The problem is you, Guthrie. You and the rest of them. You don't know what's best for me. How could you? None of you know anything about me." But he counters with, "We want to, Marrow." She says, "Don't bother. Unless you've lived a whole life in the underground where humanity is just a word and sunlight's just a legend, you can't understand me. Callisto is the only one who understands. There's a typo, but I think what it means to say is the only one I can be around because she understands loss." That's poignant to Sam, who is comes from a family of miners, right? So he also would be able to identify with being underground. He points out how silly all of that is, though, and she tackles him, pressing a bone knife up to his throat and holding him down. He likens losing his mom, who's sick, to her losing Callisto. She's enjoying the experience, but she does relent, and the two officers show up. Marrow lashes out at them, but Sam stops her. She wants to relish the attack, but something in her has changed, and she's kind of thinking, like, why is she not enjoying this? She says, "For the joy of the kill, for the liberation this mayhem will bring, she waits for a feeling she knows won't come. It can't, because she started changing the minute she walked through the doors to the Xavier Institute." We see a flashback of Sam on the phone. Marrow watching and deciding that she'd try and make him her only friend, and maybe more, when Sam answers that he'll come home as long as need be. The officers explain how their lives have changed for the worse as a result of her first attack. Oh, there we go. So I did mention it. And then Sam asks, look at the fear in his eyes and ask yourself, do I want to be the monster he's afraid of, or the human being who saved him from that monster? And then Storm and Callisto arrive, and they further that point that she must be the hero or the monster. She has to make that choice, and she replies, I'm not a monster. Marrow apologizes to the officers, and they leave. And Sam says he's proud of her, and she doesn't understand why. But he explains, why, just because I said a few words? No, Sarah. Until a few seconds ago, you would have said them just to get me off your back. I'm proud of you because you meant them. You done good, kid. And they embrace. Later, Callisto says her goodbye to Marrow, who makes her promise to come back. Use the time wisely, Sarah. You'll only get one shot at a second chance. Don't waste it for pride's sake. And then she says, promise you come back, and I'll promise not to. But Cal doesn't make that promise, and she leaves. She says, light to you, young Morlock. Make me proud. And then Marrow says, light to you, Callisto. But it's not certain that she even hears this last part. She says, love to you. Not I love you, but love to you. Storm asks Marrow if they can have a truce, and she responds, maybe. Sam rockets Marrow back to the mansion, which she definitely enjoys. She's with affection, but also like it's a wild ride. And then the conclusion of the issue is that all of this is observed by a shadowy figure hiding in the bushes, and he says, for all intents and purposes, she has no family now. Aside from the X-Men, she is one of them. Which is exactly how I wanted it. Yum. I don't know why Dark Beast would say yum. It threw me for a long time, but he just says yum. And that's how it ends. So this is Joe Kelly writing. The opening full-page spread of Marrow has her wearing combat boots. And like we always see her shoes, but like we don't get the detail. And there's a lot of detail, and it's like military issue boots, which is really a great touch in there. They're in good detail, and I think it sets a specific tone. There's some really nice things happening in the issue. Marrow is out for blood, but she never draws any. Her moms, in quote, are fighting, but it's actually neither of them that brings resolution in the end. Sam is an interesting choice for a love interest, as his history is with mining underground, and then he has some trauma there, and because he introduces almost a third mother element to the motivating factors behind the story, because his mom is the one who's writing to call him back, and she's sick. Storm is an X-Man, true, but she's also the Morlock's leader. But she did rip out Marrow's heart. So there's a sense in which we are supposed to think that the tension in Marrow's story is about pain and beauty, or not, but as usual for an X title, we see that there's something more about family and relationships, and that's really the undercurrent that's carrying the narrative, that she's not alone, right? It's a classic, X-Men vibe. We've seen this many times before. All right, good issue. Moving on, speaking of the high highs, now we're going to get into some low lows, in my opinion. Read them for yourself if you want. This is Uncanny X-Men 360. It's the anniversary of Magneto's battle with the X-Men in their debut at Cape Citadel, which is like one of the first X-Men comics. Marrow tags along with the team, apparently to go see Peter Corbeau, who is works at NASA or some such. And there's something about what's being planned for launch. There's a shuttle or a satellite that's about to be launched, but Peter is kidnapped. So there's a meeting with Valerie Cooper, at the in Washington D.C. at the what's the Abraham Lincoln sitting, the statue? You know what I'm talking about. That's where it is. And Marrow comments that Abraham Lincoln is ugly, to which Wolverine responds, "Good news is that with great men and women, it ain't what they look like, it's what they do." Kurt visits her room while she's away. Like, Kurt is back at the mansion, just briefly opens the door, and it appears to be the basement's danger room. It's not always clear in the beginning, but it seems like the room that she picked is I'm thinking it's the old danger room, like the original danger room, not the updated one. But anyway, he opens the door, and all you see in there is just loads of bones and dead rats that are hung up. The team is attacked, and Marrow mentions to Rogue that she can't control where her bones grow, but it might be a joke. Rogue is flying away and Marrow is kind of like holding onto her neck like a piggyback. And Rogue says something about her thigh bone, I think. And Marrow's like, can you control where your bones grow? But it might just be a joke. The Grey King, who is one of these characters that they're fighting, who is featured on the cover, can dampen powers, though, and he dampens Marrow's power, which in fact causes intense pain in her head and face. And she clings to Storm now as their aircraft is shot out of the sky. And as she's holding on to Storm, she's saying something like, it hurts, or help me. Something like, she's very obviously in pain, which I find to be intriguing because her mutant power is the uncontrollable bone growths and the pain. And theoretically, she also has a healing factor that helps with that, when they break through her skin and stuff. So when her power is dampened, when she loses her power and she's in immense pain, it makes me wonder if the pain is that she can't control the bones, or what I think is more likely is that she's suddenly, imagine if a normal human suddenly had to deal with all of these bone growths throughout her body. Without her healing factor, it's a wonder she doesn't die immediately. We see her lose her powers way, way later in more modern, what do they call it, M-Day and stuff like that. And it's handled a little differently. But here, and at least one other time I can think of, she loses her powers and it causes her a lot of pain. But that's kind of the end of this issue. They're all kind of falling out of the sky. It's a Siegel issue, and I kind of just don't like it. There's not much Marrow. It's not an enjoyable read. But we do see a part in it where she breaks open a rusty lock with her bone shards. So, they're harder than normal bone, I think, which has kind of been suggested already. They've given her horns, like sticking out of her head, like a Hellboy sort of situation, and dreadlocks. But also, I don't know what it would be like if you were reading it not looking for Marrow, but if you look for Marrow, they put her in like shadow a lot, or like half behind something, to the extent that I think I don't know if it's that they didn't want to draw her, or they didn't know how to draw her, or they didn't want to mess up consistency. But it's, yeah. All right, next part. So this is number 80, X-Men 80. And Marrow has landed with Rogue after the attack and the crash of the team that happened at the end of the issue. She saves Rogue from an alligator. An alligator comes out. Rogue has been depowered as well. And Marrow stabs a bone knife through the alligator's jaw, I think. She says, Rogue says, guess this means you like me better than an ugly alligator? And Marrow just says, you smell better. Later, she asks Colossus to pull out her growths. She's not in pain. I mean, presumably she's in pain, but she seems to be collected about it. She asks Colossus to pull out one of her broken bone growths. And she says, quote, if I could do it myself, it already would have been done. Can't reach the broken bones. No good ones grow till old ones go. And Colossus says, this is going to hurt you. And she says, they always hurt. This one will just hurt more. Do it, Russian. And he says, as you wish. Sorry if that hurt, but I'm certain it didn't. And there's actually like a splurt of like some red, like some blood. Sorry if that hurt, but I'm certain it didn't hurt half as much as what you tried to do to those innocent people the last time we crossed paths, which is a reference to the when she had her heart ripped out with Gene Nation. And she says, haven't you heard? Storm and I made up. Best friends now. But anytime you want to hurt me, go right ahead. It felt nice. Almost as nice as when your brother Mikhail would do it. And he's like, what? And there's never any follow-up on that. And in the future, we'll see that even though they knew each other, I'm not sure that there's any. I think she's just being a punk. A lot of this gets chalked up to that. And I think, honestly, that's probably the only writing direction sometimes that people had. She's a punk. Some of the team are still without their powers, which we can infer to mean that Marrow's powers are still being affected as well. There's a neat shot where Kurt is wielding one of Marrow's bone swords. It's just really neat because he usually uses like a rapier or something like that. He's got a bone sword. Ultimately, the whole thing is revealed that Cerebro sort of formed its own X-Men, and there's an anti-mutant satellite that was brought down, but it was blamed on the real X-Men because the fake X-Men were there calling themselves the X-Men. Whatever. So back to Kelly writing. The artwork on Marrow is almost scaly for the bones, which is really cool. But I'm not crazy about some of the other more round choices. Sometimes the artwork in comics is a little more generous to the anatomy of its characters. the horns and the dreadlocks are gone, and the story's all over the place, and I didn't really care for it. There's some artwork at the back of the issue, and this is kind of interesting. It has the team in some sort of snow-covered setting. I don't know what it's. Is it referencing an issue to come or something? I don't know. But the whole team is there, and they're all colored, but Marrow is barely this monochrome silhouette in the back, which again, it's like, I don't know. Maybe, yeah, I would absolutely love to talk with any of the original writers or artists, because I would love some insight as to, was their intent behind some of these things, or was it a free-for-all, or like, was there a tacit agreement that some things were a free-for-all and some things weren't? I'd love that insight. Anyway, all right. Next issue. Whoop. Sorry, I messed up my OBS there. This next issue is Uncanny X-Men 361. So Marrow, new story. Marrow has swiped Colossus's sketchbook, and she makes the point that if what she has, which is her room, is up for grabs, they've kind of kicked her out, and they want to use it as a danger room again, then so isn't everyone else's stuff up for grabs. And there's some drama. She says she took it because she liked a pretty drawing in it, but then just gives the whole thing back. Later, at the end of the issue, or near the end of the issue, Colossus intrudes on her. He like opens the door without knocking. And she appears to be taking down some pictures or putting up some pictures, or I'm not sure, in the dark from magazines. They're like cutouts of models and ads and things like that. She freaks out. He apologizes and slips a drawing that he did of her under the door. It's a Siegel issue. We don't have a lot of Marrow stuff going on, though. You can see, talking about what the tacit agreements were, you can kind of see that she's, I'm so sorry. I'm still dealing with long COVID stuff. It's not fun. We can see that they're kind of riding this line of, she wants to be beautiful, or she ogles beauty. And, sometimes it works, sometimes not so much. So that's Siegel. Next issue. It is a Kelly issue, but there's just not much to it. It's number 81, X-Men number 81. We open with Kurt trying to convince Marrow to join the team in the danger room to practice, but she's not interested. It seems that they have indeed moved her room to she calls it a closet. Presumably it's just a smaller room. Logan actually threatens to give her private lessons, saying again that perhaps he let her win when they had their little duel, and she eventually relents and agrees to train with the team. So not much Marrow going on. It's a Joe Kelly issue, and let's move on. This is just a quick cameo. It's an Avengers issue, Avengers number 10. The X-Men are watching an Avengers parade on TV, and Marrow just makes a remark about it. But to be thorough, I included it in. So X-Men number 362. S.H.I.E.L.D. is responding to Pyro attacking a field, or like burning the field. And Fury is talking to the X-Men. Marrow, who has bone horns again, asks Colossus why everyone fawns over Professor X. He's missing. And Colossus answers that it's kind of like, he's a great man. It's they kind of respect him. And she replies, yeah, well, my kind is Morlocks. If not for the professor, I might still be with my people and happy. As far as I'm concerned, wherever Chucky X is, he can just stay missing. And then later, when Marrow is helping rescue victims of Pyro's uncontrolled legacy virus mania, and bantering with Storm about Xavier, questioning where he was when the Morlocks were living on garbage, etc., she rescues a child. And the child asks if she's a monster, and she says, no, I'm not. Later, Storm directs Marrow, and she taunts back, but Rogue mentions something about Marrow's leadership ability, and she says, me? Lead? That'll be a cold day in Hades. She asks Gambit about Xavier, who says he's just a man, but that he's worthy of respect for what he's done. So she's kind of starting to find her place in the team. There's just so much static, so much extra things going on. The legacy virus, and where is Professor X, and Cerebro, and Joseph, but I guess he's not here anymore, and there's just so much bloat. There's just not a lot of page space to focus on everything. So some issues are light on some, and some issues we get more. Okay, next issue. 363, Uncanny X-Men 363. When You're Unwanted is the title of this story. Marrow is with Kitty, Kurt, and Logan in a San Francisco Land's End park, and in her stunted horns, like looking like Hellboy, appearance. She remarks how it must be nice for Kitty to look normal. Elsewhere, Cerebro-esque robots are doing things, and a Toad is feeding Xavier at Alcatraz. It's like I said, it's a mess. Later, Marrow discovers that she likes Berkeley due to the fashion choices. They have to go in disguise, and she's like, aren't people going to notice us? These are weird disguises. And Wolverine's like, nah, it's Berkeley. And she says, finally, a surface town with some character. It's like my Morlock village above ground. Kitty sees a Star of David necklace on the by a street vendor, which causes Marrow to remark on it, and then Kurt actually purchases it with money that he found in his pocket. It was like a jacket that they had taken from someone else. They discover the place where the real Xavier may have been abducted. Marrow gets a compliment on her piercing. Someone's like, hey, that's a cool piercing. And she just breaks it off and offers it to the person, which almost turns into a whole thing, but then Wolverine diffuses it. They meet with Logan's friend. Kurt gives Kitty the necklace. Marrow is typical, and they all teleport to Alcatraz, where they are met with the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. In this case, it's Blob, Toad, Mimic, and Post, who is a character that I did not know. The battle that they have is short and ends in a stalemate as Xavier is revealed, only to have a Cerebro unit smash through the wall. The summary here is Siegel again, just superficial Marrow. All right, moving on. The next issue, the Alcatraz crew team up with the Brotherhood. They battle the Cerebro unit. Joe Kelly, this is an issue, Joe Kelly issue, but there's no real Marrow. It's just another plot thread that's going on. He kept the horned look, though, which is not the worst that we're going to end up seeing of Marrow by the end in terms of appearance. And then we'll just move on to the next number 364, Uncanny X-Men 364. So we open with Cerebro scanning Manhattan and finding 23 mutants, and then it's noted that it doesn't include the Morlock tunnels. So it's kind of, they play with the ambiguity of how many Morlocks there are. And, you know, remember, it was a stadium full that got pulled through from the other dimension. But apparently there's still some living down there. I don't know. Marrow thinks that if Wolverine's claws aren't hurting the unit attacking him, then her bones may not be very effective. Toad appears to be using actually one of her bone daggers. She attacks, but it destroys or absorbs Toad. It's like collecting them. Kurt and Mimic defeat the unit, and an argument about Xavier starts, to which Marrow again points out that she doesn't care much for Xavier because he didn't do much for the Morlocks. Post threatens Kitty, and Marrow leaps to attack him, but Kitty grabs her arm and phases herself, Marrow, and Xavier through the floor to the basement network below. And this is not the first time that Kitty has helped Marrow in this story, or vice versa. Marrow suggests Kitty phase them through some more walls, which would be a blind phase, has some danger, but it may be their only option, and it brings them behind the attacking unit. They retreat again, but Marrow stays to cover them. And she says, go on, get the egghead back through the wall. I'll do the stupid thing and stay behind real heroic-like. And this prompts Kitty to say, Marrow voluntarily stayed behind. For all her sarcasm and bitterness, she may become a great X-Man yet, Professor. So later, as Kitty is attempting her escape with Xavier, the unit finds them, and it's under attack from Marrow, who is betting that she can take it down before Wolverine, who is also fighting, and Mimic and Post are also fighting. So it zaps Kitty, which causes Wolverine to behead it, and Marrow then like he chops off the head and it goes flying, and then Marrow hits it with one of her bones and like a bat. I have a note that a slight bone crest appears with the horns in this frame, and then by the issue's end, the horns are gone. So, okay, sure. You know, the artist is trying to return to a specific look, right? It heals up, the robot does, and it zaps Mimic, which leads the team to conclude that since Xavier didn't sense her death, so they're realizing that this absorption thing, this ray, is not actually killing, but it's like collecting. They realize that they need to get zapped as well. So this is a Siegel issue. Marrow has an earring in one of the panels, but it's never visited again. A lot of the same stuff, posturing, banter with Wolverine. When you have so many different characters on screen, it's hard to focus on anyone in particular. And when you do, it's not likely to be the rookie characters like Marrow. So I get it. I understand what they're doing there. Next issue is X-Men number 84. The X-Men, including Marrow, are encased in some sort of rocky gel cocoons. The Professor gets his power back, and the X-Men are somehow freed. And Cerebro initiates the Xavier protocols, which is should be like a final death knell to the team, but it's all actually a mental trick that Xavier was tricking Cerebro. And the team attacks. Marrow is stabbing a unit in the head, so apparently it works to use bone knives now. Finally, Cerebro is defeated with several bone knives sticking out of his back. So she found some weak spots, and the team leaves. The final panel is a silhouette, and this really ticked me off, to be quite frank. It's a silhouette of the team walking away, but there's no silhouette of Marrow. She's not there. Everybody else you can tell who is who, and she's just not there. And maybe she's walking directly in front of Colossus or something. I don't know, but it ticked me off. So that was a Joe Kelly issue, but there's not much Marrow. And then we have another little like cameo thing to talk about in a series called Liberators, X-Men Liberators. Have I got that right? Yeah, Liberators number 4. And she just happens to be at the end. It was its own story, but at the end, she's like pictured with the team. Like she doesn't say anything. There's nothing major going on, but she's in the issue. So it's in the list. All right. This issue, 365, Uncanny X-Men 365, Ghost of Xmas Past. Christmas time. The main story is about Illyana. And I'm not really sure if it's actually her or if it's like the memory of her or something, but she's kind of like trying to reach out to Colossus, who doesn't really know that it's her. And it's like trying to get him to remember. But he has been drawing her, but without her face, because he can't remember her face. So he's got these sketches. Throughout his story, which his is the main story, there's like this shadowy figure that keeps swiping the drawings. And, well, swiping the drawings, but writing a story on, like, in the margins of the drawing and leaving them, like, on for him to find. And then at the end, on, like, what would be like the gift giving, like Christmas morning kind of situation, she gives him the final page, and it's in a box, and the box is like mismatched wrapping paper, which I just think is cute. Why would Marrow wrap something nice? Come on. She says, "I've got something for you that I did. Well, we did. I can't draw, but I wanted to say thanks for that cool picture you drew of me." Remember that he slid under her door. "So I decided we could collaborate. We make a good team, don't we?" And it's a picture of the team that Colossus has drawn. And then she like concludes the story. And then there's a PS with an arrow pointing at her. "I do not look like this," which I just think is hilarious, because having talked about her appearance, and she's got like the horns, talking about the way the artists have been depicting the character Marrow so far, this has got to be an in-joke for someone somewhere. But the idea is that she has been sort of creating this story in the margins of Colossus's drawings. And so it's kind of a cute story. The horns and the dreadlocks are back again. It's just a neat story. They don't get super deep into Marrow. It's just cute. And then the last story that we're going to cover in this video, which is fairly long, I think the longest one to date so far, is as a Joe Kelly issue. It's called A Tale of Two Mutants. It's X-Men number 85. And time has passed. Colossus and Logan are working together. Gambit is back on the team. Xavier has his power back. Marrow has no horns. They save a hospital, and Magneto prepares to wage war against humanity. It's a whole thing. It's not really ending on a banger, but the reason I'm doing it here is this is a Joe Kelly. It's mostly a setup for a bigger story that's going to happen, a bigger arc. But this next issue that we're going to cover next is so good. I want it to be the first video, or the first issue that we cover in the next video. But also, poignantly, this marks the end of Joe Kelly's writing for the character. So from here on out, Joe Kelly doesn't write Marrow anymore. And I just felt like it was appropriate. So if we were naming eras, this is kind of like the Kelly era Marrow coming to the close. From here on out, there's going to be highs and there's going to be lows, and it's really that way for the rest of the while. But I felt like this was as good a stopping point as any. And so, I would call it the Kelly era Marrow. Moving forward, we're going to see the highs are really high. And just, yeah. I think what we can sort of conclude and summarize so far is that the character is a really great character, or maybe I should say, this is my feeling, is that it's a really great character with a lot of potential who was just a victim of character bloat and overshadowing. And when you have a character that is the Morlocks, and we'll talk more about this later, but the Morlocks, and specifically Marrow, it's almost this microcosm of the X-Men. It's like everything has been shifted up. So traditionally, the X-Men stories have been about trying to find their way in a world that hates and fears them. In these storylines, we've almost left that behind, and it's gotten a little bit more than that. Like, they're really constantly saving the world, constantly having drama, constantly having big punch-ups that have crossovers and multi-parts and things like this. And it's almost like when they grew in that direction, and I'm not saying there's good or bad, I'm just saying that that's what I think is happening, right? These other stories. When that happened, it's almost like the writers wanted to take the Morlocks, who had been kind of almost, I'm going to say throwaway, third-rate flat characters and concepts. They almost elevated those up to take that place of finding their place in a world that hates and fears them. So with the character of Marrow, a lot of what she's going through is really great for her as a character and is really fun reading for Marrow fans. But for X-Men fans, it's not a lot of stuff we haven't seen before, because it's a lot of the same stories that other X-Men have also gone through. And actually in the next issue that we cover, that is explicitly pointed out to her. But even in what we've read so far, Sam is like, you think you're the only one who's lost stuff? And the reality is, no. And that's both a pro and a con, because that's what binds them together. That's what I think is at the heart of a lot of X-Men and mutant-centric titles. But they kind of grew in a different direction and then had sort of this uplift. But then when they wanted to come back down, they had already put Marrow on the team. So what do you do when you do that? Well, you draw her in shadows and silhouettes and don't include her and that sort of stuff. So I think she was kind of always destined to be this backseat character. But I am really glad for some of the issues that we've been able to read where writers and artists were able to just kind of go crazy with it, because I suspect that the rules were a little bit more lax for a character like this, where nobody really cares that much. Anyway, so this is this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you like what you're seeing so far, I'll try to make sure I have water next time. I apologize for that. I know it's probably not so great listening to my voice coughing every 5 minutes. But if you like what you're hearing here and want to see more, or if you have thoughts, questions, comments, observations, if there's anything I missed, if there's anything you want to talk about that we've covered, because we're going to cover quite a bit more, but if there's anything we've talked about that you have a different take on, or you own these issues, or if you have any connections to any of these authors or writers or artists, all that stuff, let me know in the comments, and I will see you next time. Excelsior.